love it. Everybody like immediately looks down at their laptop. It's like, let me just make sure to check I fix that. So, yeah, in case anybody's afraid of taking notes, all we really care about is the decision points. You don't really need to do the play-by-play. There's some people in here that speak pretty quickly, so I don't know if that helps anybody willing to. Well, thank you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm one of those people that speaks really fast too, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Yep. Um, Also, I'll be watching the Zulip room, but if anybody else wants to help, so if anybody wants anything on the mic, then they're in the chat room. You can put Mike colon and then your comment, and we'll get it read out at the microphone. And if we miss it, keep pestering us.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to TLS at IETF 115. We have note takers, and so let's see. If you're watching this already, you probably already know about the meeting tips, but please, we'd like to use uh, the on-site tool to keep track of the meeting queue. So please join that so your attendance is taken and so that you can put yourself in the line to go speak at the mic. Anything else we need here? Let's see. And please note the mask policy and please wear your mask when you're not speaking. Or maybe even, let's see. By this time, you should be familiar with the note well. So just a reminder of code of conduct and rules of participation. There we go. So TLS working group has been pretty good in recent times, but we'd like you to make sure that you please treat each other with respect and keep the contributions technical. Okay, I think we have two note takers even. This is going to be a great meeting. And again, log into the on-site tool. And also when you speak at the mic, it's always good to let us know who you are so that we can note it in the minutes properly. We do have a fairly full agenda, but we should be able to get through it all, I think, in our time. Okay, you want to do?
Right. So since last time we had two RFCs published, they were actually published during the days after the last time we met. But it's RFC 9257, guidance for external pre-shared keys, usage in TLS, and an accompanying one that was 9258 for importing external PSKs for TLS 1.3. We have delegated credentials in the queue. Nick's out for a couple of months, but Richard Barnes has nicely agreed as co-author to as one of the co-authors to take over and shepherd that through. So we're in the process of trying to get that done. We have two drafts that are kind of paused. Maybe we could consider redoing those after we get this current crop done. The RRC for TLS 1.3 and 1.2 draft is through working group class call. I actually think through multiple working group class calls. It is waiting on me to do the write-up. I will get that done shortly, and then we'll progress that forward. I did note already there were a couple of things missing out of it, like there's not a security consideration, so we kind of got to fix that before I send it to Paul. Compact TLS has expired. I don't think that means it's going away permanently. I just think that we the authors got busy doing something else. And today we're going to talk about 8446 BIS, 8447 BIS, the well-known ECH config list, and another draft. The encrypted client hello is kind of in pause mode at this point while they're still getting implementation experience. And the hybrid KE in TLS 1.3 is kind of in the same boat. And SNP, I think we're just kind of, there's not much to it. We're just kind of waiting for people to like see what they think about it, and then eventually we'll get to it. So I'm hoping maybe in the next cycle, maybe by March or slightly after March, we'll be moving that one forward. Next, please. And we have 2 expired drafts. So maybe at the end, if we have some free time, we can talk about them. Is David Benjamin here? But in any event, we can maybe talk about these 2 drafts because they were things that we adopted and they kind of stalled. And that's it. So I think now, unless there's any questions or any further agenda bash, we're going to hand it over to Ecker to talk about 8446 BIS.
So just since you asked about CTLS, yeah, this is still a live item. I just approved him PRs for Ben the other day, and I think he may have just forgotten to submit it because like he was like, approve my PRs so I can publish. So I think he just forgot. So we can take care of that. So as people know, we were going to quickly rev 8446 to fix some terminology issues and to clarify some points. That, as usual, turned into a 5-year mission. Well, I think like a 1.5-year mission, but there it is. So I'm hoping to terminate that mission today. So the current status is I had a bunch of outstanding PRs. I merged them. Nobody seemed to object. I did run some of them by people. Check the change log if you disagree. And of course, we'll have a working group bus call so you can disagree then. There are a few outstanding PRs and open issues, which I hope to mostly resolve now with the objective of like cranking out a new version and being done. Next slide. So I'm just going to work through the things that are that continue to be outstanding as that they are. So first we had this PR 1275 around unsolicited extensions. So the backstory here is that I thought the text was supposed to say, and I think everybody else thought the text was supposed to say, that basically you couldn't send extensions that the other side hadn't offered. But when we rewrote the text to sort of talk about request and response extensions, Jonathan Hoyland felt that, so you'll recall that like so the pattern here is like CH contains like requests and EE contains responses. And Jonathan Hoyland, I think, came to the conclusion that perhaps you could send extension requests that were in request mode in EE because they were requests, not responses. That was not the intention. This PR basically attempts to make that clear. It was actually Ben Kadick who asked for that clarification. I don't see him here. So if anybody disagrees with the substance here, please say so. And if you don't disagree with the substance here, take a look at the text or don't, and I'm going to merge it. Okay, next up. We did a bunch of sort of hand wringing around key update limits in RC9147 for DTLS. We realized afterwards that those update limits actually apply just as well to TLS, and so we pulled them in here. We had some text that kind of went through like the process, and I merged it in, and MT was sort of, and I put a PR up for it. MT was like, "This text isn't actually very good," which I think it has some merit as a point. So I think there's really a question of like, do we want to just like not be consistent versus try to work this text? I can go either way. If anybody like feels strongly about it, now's a good time. Otherwise, Martin and I will just work it out. Great. Next up, we're going to burn right through this. We had a bunch of discussion about what to do with bogus tickets. And in the last time we discussed this, I suggested we should add a new alert that would say like invalid ticket or ticket invalid or something. And I, in fact, wrote up a PR for that, which is this PR. And then in the process that I noticed, we had actually added previously unknown PSK identity between 8446 and here. And so my claim is that does the job for this, and maybe we wordsmith around the text around it, but we should just close this PR. So I propose to close the PR. And again, if somebody links like the description of unknown PSK identity is bad, then go ahead and tell me that's bad. Great. Next up. There's finally, we have a PR from John Mattson about, there's all this text about how you can't use PSKs with certificates, and 8773 updates that. And the text kind of says like you can't do it unless there's a extension that says you can do it, and 8773 says you can do that. In light of sort of the confusion about the exact security properties of this, I need to carefully review this text. I'd appreciate if someone else would too, but I think generally this is like probably on the right track. We just want to make sure there was like some very like close parsing of the exact text here in a bunch of papers, and so we want to make sure we actually clarify rather than declarify.
Yeah, I mean, and the nice thing is it's like 2 sentences.
Yeah,
so it's not like it's super complicated.
So I'll bounce it off some other people. What's the status of that? Next slide. Finally, we have two open issues raised by David Benjamin about clarifying the behavior of HRR. I'm not here to tell you the behavior of HRR is entirely clear, but I am here to tell you that after many discussions, we have not come to a conclusion that made anybody happier. And we discussed last time, the put was either someone comes up with a proposal to actually improve this text that we can all agree on, which nobody has done, or we just say like, hey, we're going to leave it the way it is. I want to reframe this discussion by pointing out that the purpose of this draft is to clarify 8446 and make it better. And this text is the same text as in 8446, which is no worse. And if we can't improve it, we are clarifying a lot of other things. And so being finished is a feature, and I propose you defer these. And then we can always, if people feel like that to clarify even more later, we can do so. My suspicion is this will turn out to be potentially a substantive change, not just a clarification. And so probably like, I prefer to defer it unless someone feels strongly about it. And David and I talked about this a bit, and he didn't have any, I think when, everybody sort of timed out when I talked to David. He was kind of like, I don't even remember exactly what I wanted to do here. So everybody trying to reconstruct the state here seemed very difficult. So I propose to defer these. This is it. So I'm not hearing any objection to any of this stuff. So this is like your next to last call for this. Oh, MT.
Yeah. Do all of these things and then we'll be done. And as you say, finish is a feature. I don't want to make substantive changes to the protocol
That was
at all.
Yeah.
So if David's entertaining that sort of thing, then I would oppose that.
Okay.
Clarification's fine, but
Sounds good.
leave those.
I see somebody else, but I can't see who they are. Rich Saltz.
Is it feasible to document what the ambiguities are? And the perfectly reasonable answer is no.
I think probably very difficult.
Fine.
Okay, so I will finish these things and I will produce a new draft and we can let's call it.
So I'll let you know that my long-term plan is not to stick Ecker with this idea, but I'd like to move this to internet standard. I know some of you think that's great. Some of you could give a shit. Sorry, but don't care less. But in 6 months, we can do a protocol action and just move it because there is enough deployment and there is enough interoperability. I may need to lead on some of you to make sure that the features are actually all implemented properly, blah, blah, blah. But I think we can write a small interoperability, or I can write a small interoperability report that you as implementers review, and then we can move it.
Can I ask you a question? Does that require a new RFC number or do we just?
No, I think I can do it in place.
So it just will say proposed standard on top, but it actually.
Yep.
Okay. David.
David Skenazy, deployment enthusiast. If we manage to make IPv6 a full standard, we can probably make TLS-13 a full standard.
Well, yeah. So I'm the person who thinks this is dumb because I just think we should have one standards level. So that's. But I'm happy to have other people do work.
I fully agree with all of that.
All right, great. Thank you.
You want me to do these?
Yeah, please. I'm not going to move the slides. Click to share. How about share? All right, cool.
All right. So this is for RFC 8447 BIS, which is the INET considerations for TLS 1.3. So currently this draft is written so that it obsoletes 8447, which means it takes all of the text from 8447 and then tries to modify it in place, which is really kind of very confusing and difficult to read and difficult to review. And I think it'll be difficult for IANA to apply. So I kind of am proposing we just make it update so we can just include the changes. It's much less awkward and easier to deal with. I've done that with section 7 and I'll do that with the rest of the document unless somebody really likes it the way it is. Is there anybody who objects to making it an update?
No, I mean, I think this is kind of an editorial thing. And again, remember, this whole document is instructions for IANA. And at the end of the day, whatever's easier for them to understand, I think is probably a good thing. And they're like, should, was, updates throughout the document made it kind of confusing. You know, like at least Laurie was like, what are you trying to say here? So
Hope people will forgive me not getting in the queue. I'll do that shortly. I have seen a number of times when the ISG gets very bent out of shape about these kind of diff documents. And so I guess I would just like make sure our AD is happy with that plan. Because if not, then like we'll be, we'll be back here in like in 2 months. So I don't object, but like I just like want to make sure I flag that.
Okay.
And while Paul's looking up, I'll just quickly add David Skenazy. In general, I prefer obsolete documents because then you read them, you have the whole picture in your head. Except here, what matters is not the document; it's the website that IANA runs. So this sounds perfect.
Yeah, that would actually be the argument I would make with the ISG.
So, Paul is AD. So normally the reason for a diff document is that people are afraid that they're going to open up a can of worms on other changes in the document. And so they just want to specifically say this diff, that diff. And we don't want to argue and rediscuss the entire other bulk of the document. I think that doesn't apply here.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think a diff does not make any sense whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so we'll get this revised as an update so that it is clearer within the next couple of weeks.
Rich.
Rich.
Hi, Rich Sauls is one of the designated experts. It's not just Diana who cares. And it's fine. If it's simpler, it seems I've read both versions and yeah, we can follow the directions either way.
Great. Next slide. So we added some text as to what D should mean. So because now if you remember, we have in the recommended column, yes, no, and D. And here we say D, the item is discouraged and should not or must not be used. That's the text that we propose right now. We'll have time to resolve that, but if people have comments, it would be great to get them now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, whatever. I'm not. The Q thing takes too long to get into. So, who chooses the should or the must, or the should not or the must not? Is that just based on?
Yeah, I think it was intended. I don't remember why we did this. I think it was intended that it depends on what the context is.
Right.
You might have some items that are discouraged and they're only applicable in certain contexts. So unless you're in that context of,
Yeah, it's kind of weird to put sort of normative language in the registry in this way because it applies to things that have their own. Each one of the things with a D in there probably has a document describing why it's a bad idea, right? So maybe just like end of the sentence.
yeah,
is discouraged as described in the linked documents or something like that.
Yeah, I think that would be better. I tend to agree that the should not and must not seems to be excessive at this point.
Yeah, +1 to what Martin just said.
Okay. Any other comments? All right, then we'll reorganize this so that those normative should nots and must nots are not there anymore. Next. Then we also added some text to the policy, registration policy, saying that a standards action, that ISG approval is required for transitions from yes to no, yes to discouraged, or discouraged to yes or no. And we probably could clarify that text a little bit. But that's the policy that we have outlined for this. And I think that's reflects what we've discussed previously. Any other Martin?
Is this every state transition? Yeah.
into Y.
So it's
You
not
could
every
simply
state.
say ISG approval is necessary for all other state transitions.
So I reviewed this text because we were copying and pasting it for MLS. And I convinced myself at least that it did cover all the state transitions because it talks about entering the Y or N states requiring approval and then the conditions for moving from either of those to D. So I think that covered all three legs of the triangle.
Yeah, I think I prefer if it was a little clearer. I think the goal is you want ISG approval for all state transitions, and then standards action for getting a Y. That's
So you're saying for all state transitions, it's this basically this last sentence should be for all their state transitions, ISG approval is required.
yeah, or all other, because we have the adding a value of Y to recommended requires standards action.
Right.
So if you're going from D to Y, that's standards action, which is in contradiction to the next sentence already,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that would be simpler. It's good.
My question is not about this slide. It's more generic, so I'm going to let Paul jump in first.
Sorry, me take us a little bit. Paul, just speaking as myself, is there a reason, like if you're redoing this part anyway, is there a reason why we're using one letter abbreviations? Like, are we trying to save money on the website on IANA for the
So,
wire format?
so it fits in the columns. I mean, it looks horrible when you put it in the document, spins across. There's a note in there to explain what it is. So yeah, it is a single letter that we have in the column because they're so long. Like think of the Cypher Suite names, but there's other places where it's explained what that means. I mean, yeah,
We could expand it out here, but in the column, I think it's better for a single letter. David.
David Skenazy. From looking, this looks like it's your last slide.
Yes.
And I filed an issue on the document a few weeks ago and no one has commented on it. So I figured I'd just come and tell people about it so I can get opinions, which is the exporter labels registry is currently specification required. And we were using an exporter for something internally at Google. And I was like, well, crap. Now we're just going to squat on it because we just can't create a specification for the specific thing. Given that it's a string registry with infinite room, can we just make it expert review since we're opening the can of worms? Feel free to tell me it's out of scope.
Well, I mean, we could certainly make a change like that in this document, but I thought that it was only specific prefixes that were extension. I mean,
not currently. It's the entire thing.
Huh. Okay.
Switching it to being like that for specific prefixes sound totally fine by me. I just want some room where I can reserve something without having a spec.
Yeah. Ecker?
Well, David, you can just generate a random UUID and put your things after it. So I think first of all, I think specification required is the wrong standard in any case, because what we've been doing is the way, because specification required is I guess some unclarity whether it incorporates IDs. And so the way we handled it everywhere else was we made an expert review and then said an ID is good enough. And so I think at minimum we should do that for this topic.
I think I thought we did that universally for all the registries.
Well, I guess David seems to think we didn't. I mean, I haven't checked myself. But I guess I would be supportive of this change. In fact, I'd be supportive, I think, generally of the change. I think this plan we had of making it incredibly easy to get code points was super successful. And I actually wonder if we should make it even easier and be like an email will be sufficient and with no description of the mechanism. These spaces are not, the reason we did this was these spaces were not, the reason we required a specification was not out of some rate limiting exercise to make it hard to get the code points, but was merely out of I think a kind of a good government theory about having it good to have things on the internet documented. But I think that maybe that was the wrong theory, but in any case, So I wonder if I wonder if we should make an even bigger carve out that says maybe a document is required, but the document could just say like neener neener. We're not going to tell you what this does.
I mean, so it does have the language that we have for all the other ones. It is sufficient to have an internet draft that is posted and never published, or a document from another standards body, internet consortia, university site. The thing with spec required is it's supposed to be public. You're supposed to be able to get to it. So David's point still kind of stands.
Right. Well, I guess I'm wondering, would it be sufficient to have have a redacted description of the protocol? I mean, again, like maybe the answer is merely first come first served. I guess I do want to encourage people to have specifications that make better for the internet, but I also don't want to make it. I don't think it serves any useful purpose to make it impossible to get code points if you're not going to publish what your thing is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's why I was thinking expert review, because first come, first serve, sure, you probably don't want me registering TLS-14 and Ecker stinks. But if it's, anything, like there's no point in saying you have to publish something and that thing can be empty. Like that's what expert review means,
Okay. I think we'll kind of review this and
I think submit a PR and we'll review it like
Yeah.
every other time. So, so David's out. Yov.
So just to make sure I understand, standards action implies ISG approval because all RFCs are approved by the ISG. So if the working group wants to do say, Charter 20 die document, that's a fine way of turning that from Y to N.
Okay. Paul?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak more. Paul Wouters. So this came up in another meeting this week too about whether a draft can be considered a specification as in per specification required. So I'll take this to the IEC as a discuss item because like we need to figure it out. But my view is that a draft gets you at most an early allocation, and either your draft expires and then your early allocation expires, or it becomes an RFC, in which case you are an RFC. So I don't consider a draft a publication in the sense of publication required. But I'm going to verify that with the rest of the IEC.
So just to be clear, we litigated this last time when we did it, this particular RFC 8447. This was a point of discussion. And so that's why the text is in there about it could be an internet draft that never gets published. So it literally can get published and expire. It's still available because it's publicly available, but it's not, quote unquote active. You can still find it in the repositories.
So let's just try to break apart two issues, right? One issue is what the operational practice we want. And the operational practice heretofore has been that you needed to describe the protocol in some level of detail in some document, which like someone could eventually see, including an ID. And that was the consensus of the working group and the consensus of the IETF. And if we wrote the wrong thing in the document, with the wrong thing, then we'll call it expert review instead of specification required, or whatever. For the IEC to tell us what to do on that respect, right? That's already the way things are. I think what we're discussing now is a potential change that policy, which does not require the description of full description of the thing at all, right? And David, I think I just wanted to slightly respond to what you're saying, which is I'm trying to thread a needle here, which is I would like people to document their protocols, and I wish people would do so. And I understand they may not. And so I'm trying to figure out, and maybe I'm just trying to be too clever, but I'm trying to figure out some way to sort of vaguely encourage them to do so while also not requiring it. And again, maybe I'm just being too clever, but that's what I was trying to accomplish with that sort of, okay, an empty draft would be okay.
So I think it ends up being, but I think what we're talking about is first come, first serve. And then David asks a designated expert for an unofficial review. I mean, that's essentially, because otherwise we have to make a whole new process for what we're talking about, right?
Yes, I mean, all of these are very well defined in the INF policy RFC, and expert review is fine. And also for expert review, you can add a note that is instructions to the experts that shows up on the ANA page and say a specification is highly encouraged there for expert review. That might be the simplest way to do this.
I mean, just to be clear, the purpose of the expert review in this, there seems to me that the purpose of the expert review historically has been, is a reasonable allocation size? Are you asking for some ridiculous number? Are you asking for a misleading name? And is the protocol specification like, does it kind of exist, right? And so what we were talking about is relaxing that last point. And I think, you know, I think for, as David suggests, because these are meaningful strings, we don't want to have entirely first come first served, because we want to ensure like that for instance that someone doesn't register a string that like just is highly misleading. I don't actually care less about this for the numeric ones where someone wants to register 3133 add-on.
I don't know. All right, any other comments on this? So yeah, if you want to propose a PR, that would be awesome. All right, and then we can review that. Any other IANA considerations, comments? All right, so hopefully in a few weeks we'll have a revision of this, and we might be able to take it to a last call.
And we'll let Chris run that, since we're the two authors, and it would be wrong for us to do the consensus call. So next, who's next? Nimrod.
Did you get it? Do you want it? Nimrod, do you want to share the slides, or would you like me to? You can do it through the share preloaded slides, or I can do it. Yeah, you're muted as well. We can't hear you.
I've requested to share slides. I think I need your approval to do that.
I'm not getting him. Can you try to share again?
Yeah, sure. You can also run the slide if that's easier. Oh, all right. Here we go. All right. So my name is Nimrod Aviram. My co-author Carrick Butter is also here, and we shall never stop on our quest to deprecate obsolete key exchange methods in TLS. This document is a working group item for some time. It deprecates RSA key exchange and static finite field Diffie-Hellman, limits finite field Diffie-Hellman only in its fully ephemeral form to groups large enough to provide security, and discourages static elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. The only open issue is around groups in FFDHE. Discussions on the mailing list concluded that clients are unlikely to verify the group structure since it's too expensive. There was also the suggestion of creating a safe list for all safe groups, but that seems impractical, or at least unlikely to catch all safe groups on the entire internet. So asking clients to verify the group or about the connection if they can't is unlikely to work. So for moving forward, first we'd like to discuss a reasonable suggestion that was made but does not seem to have consensus. Several people have argued for deprecating FFDHE entirely, and that is a reasonable position to take, but there does not appear to be consensus for that. So in light of everything we said, our suggestion is to impose no requirement around the group structure. And we'd like to question to what extent this even matters. So web clients have already disabled FFDHE and are not going to bring it back. Email clients are not going to abort opportunistic TLS connections over group structure issues. And this single issue is the primary thing holding back the draft since around IETF115. So we recommend moving forward with this compromise It is a compromise, but it really doesn't matter much. On the other hand, this issue is the primary reason there is still no IETF document that formally deprecates RSA key exchange, and deprecating RSA key exchange and other obsolete key exchange methods would matter a lot. So we strongly recommend moving forward with these suggestions. Thanks, and I'm happy to take questions.
So I guess to drive this issue forward, is there anyone that disagrees with the way forward as suggested? We can do a poll and then take it to the list, but if nobody, I don't know, what do we think is the best way forward here? Maybe we should just do a poll and get it on record, and then we can take it to the list for an actual consensus call to kind of nail this. That sound good? All right, let me see if I can work this poll thing. Countdown clock, event map, where's the poll? Show of hands tool. Title.
Daniel, would you like to speak? Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi there, Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. So I'm trying to understand over in the chat. Yoav asks a reasonable question about who's proposing deprecation here, and Ben Schwartz. So I think the idea is that opportunistic TLS clients. You said email clients here. I'm pretty sure you mean SMTP clients who are in opportunistic mode, which is different than email clients. Don't those same opportunistic clients have the same concerns about all the other key exchange deprecations? I mean, if you're doing opportunistic TLS, surely RSA key exchange is better than nothing. So if that's if the objection is coming from opportunistic clients who would effectively fall back to clear text, then I don't see why that complaint is any different for finite field Diffie-Hellman than it is for anything else. So, Yoav's question is who's opposing the deprecation? If the opposition is coming from opportunistic folks, can we just make a carve out here and say opportunistic clients can do whatever they like, and then go ahead with saying the explicit deprecation? What's the who's actually blocking the consensus? I'm not saying bring anything back. I'm just saying opportunistic clients are simply not going to do this, right? They know that their fallback is clear text. They're not going to follow this guidance.
So the opposition to full FFDHE deprecation came mostly from, I think, Victor Duchovny. Victor, are you here by any chance? Or should I represent your position to the best of my ability? All right, I guess Victor isn't here. So I think his take was that it's quite feasible for SMTP clients to deprecate RSA with their update cycle, which is slow. And then we would get finite field Diffie-Hellman as, I don't know if the primary key exchange used in that ecosystem, but like a key exchange with like a noticeable market share. And it would be with custom groups because of advice that was given to operators of SMTP servers to generate their own custom groups.
No, I'm aware of that situation. I just don't understand why he'd be okay with accepting a deprecation of RSA key exchange as well, then.
Because they wouldn't have to fall back to clear text. They expect FFDHE support to be widely prevalent.
I see. This is what is preventing them from having to fall back to clear text to get the other stuff through and still claim to follow this guidance.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Okay, the argument is, as long as we have FFDHE to fall back to, this is what allows us to deprecate RSA.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if we say can we do a kind of deprecation that says if your other choice is falling back to clear text, if you will actively fall back to clear text, then FFDHE is okay?
If that also applies to the web, that sounds.
There's no one on the web who does. There's no one on the web who's willing to fall back to clear text. Do you know if you know of a web client that's willing to fall back to clear text for an HTTPS connection? I would like to know.
Well, you just go up top and you delete the S. Edit the
sorry?
URL.
I'm sure you can find a way to go alert somebody if they do that, Eckert, but I don't think that's relevant here.
Yes, so I'm not sure I'm familiar with the policies of all browsers on the matter, but I think there are still some unencrypted web connections somewhere on the internet.
No, that's not what DKG is saying. What DKG is saying is that the reference in the URL tells you whether to expect TLS or not.
All right, but then there's like upgrade, right? Some browser will upgrade to HTTPS even if you type HTTP.
That's what I was going to say. Is that it turns out that there are browser settings now which will attempt HTTPS first and then will fall back to HTTP. I think I can just tell you we would not be interested. Be that as it may, we would not be interested in like supporting these other server suites. We want the same policy for every for every connection, because otherwise, I can tell you why if you really care, but it's really not. It's about the web security model, and it's just not really that interesting. But I think more generally, I'd like to understand the scope of the problem here. Like how many, if we just were to say, like, if we were to like have a requirement that was a requirement in our group structure, how many things would really go from like encrypted to plain text? And if the answer is small, I'm going to go back to good government and ecosystem again, which would be better if everybody did good things. So, like,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. How big is the scope of? So imagine we were to like deprecate FFDH entirely, just as a strong counterexample, as a strong point. How many connections would go from encrypted to clear text? What fraction?
I think email clients, like SMTP clients, would probably ignore that deprecation.
No, but imagine they didn't. Imagine they didn't.
So according to Victor, much of the email ecosystem would stop being encrypted in transit because of that.
What's much? 5%? 10%?
We don't have statistics. I did try to interest people who are good in generating these statistics, but I haven't had such.
Well, so I guess my position is like this: is we're not going to send people out to like people's houses and make them turn off these cipher suites, or even the data centers. I mean, I will be over I'll be over at SendGrid later, but I'll just take care of that. But I mean, more seriously, our point is to require people to do smart things, and if like people, I think the policy of the IETF is we'd like people to transition from finite field Diffie-Hellman to elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and so if rather than sort of trying to like create this intense negotiation about exactly what text we should say, we should tell people not to do this, the thing we think is bad, and then like the email guys can ignore it for a while, or they don't ignore it, but our position is they should do something in particular. And now I'm a little unclear what the options are and exactly what recommendation we should make. We should make the right recommendation and not make a silly recommendation just because some people are behind.
The other thing is that if we tell clients to not negotiate finite field Diffie-Hellman, and there are some SMTP servers that do that, and anybody is running SMTP servers, that is when they act as SMTP clients, they do disable that. Then all of the servers that are the old ones that we are scared about suddenly dropping our connections to cleartext, we'll see their percentage of cleartext connections go down. If they're looking at the stats, if they care, and they see those things go down, they'll say, okay, we need to add elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. I mean, if this is the other thing, so Eckert, thank you for your observation of the HTTPS only or HTTPS preferred modes for browsers. Those modes should be universal as far as I'm concerned. If we make the text say, must not accept finite field Diffie-Hellman key exchange unless, in standard TLS mode, in opportunistic mode may accept FFDHE. That doesn't require browsers to accept FFDHE in their mode. It just gives a carve out so that SMTP clients like Victor's are willing, who are clutching at the FFDHE straws for their 5% of whatever their connections are. Like, it just seems that that is at least a clearer statement.
I agree with that
That's about,
interpretation. Like I say, even I don't speak for any other browser, but like I can't see us doing like I can't see us applying a different policy in optimistic versus non-optimistic mode, because like I say, those are the same origin, and so if you do that, the security properties get very weird.
all right. Martin, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the split that DKG just articulated is probably the right one. I don't actually see what we do in browsers in these sort of forced upgrades to HTTPS or opportunistic upgrades to TLS really as being an opportunistic mode at all. We're just applying the same policies that we would for HTTPS anyway. So I think the sort of email opportunistic security stuff can get a little bit of a free pass on these things, but I'm sort of in the sort of direction of saying, well, put your requirements on the groups or whatever validation that you can, and then say that you can, if you're doing an opportunistic mode, you can do anything you like really at that point. It seems to be Victor's attitude toward to the use of opportunistic TLS. He'd be happy with ROT 13.
So, I'm sorry. So you're saying you're not saying deprecate FFDHE entirely, are you? You're saying move forward with group structure requirements, but those are intractable, or at least they seem to be. Do I have your position correct?
So I'm essentially saying that we leave a carve out. If you don't care about security as a baseline, then we don't really care what you do with respect to this particular requirement, which I think is what DKG was saying.
Yes. So just to make sure I understand where we're going with this discussion, so the suggestion is to have the most stringent requirement applied to non-opportunistic TLS connections, and for opportunistic connections, basically YOLO. If I didn't get that correctly, please correct me. Yoav, please go ahead.
Yes. So my suggestion is just deprecate it entirely, and if somebody can't stand it, then they don't comply with the new RFC, and we've had this before. And if they can't get there, I mean, if you're using OpenSSL, then you're fine anyway, because it has had the ECDHE since, I don't know, version 1. And if you're using something worse than OpenSSL, then you should be using something at least as good as OpenSSL.
All right.
Okay. So Nimrod, I just wanted to double check. I know that DKG has offered to put a synopsis of what he proposed in the text for all of us, because up here the audio is pretty horrible, so I'm not sure I caught all of it. But Nimrod, do you have a good feel for the way forward?
So one way forward is to move with our suggestion and just be done with it. But I think that's not the consensus of this discussion. The consensus of this discussion is for non-opportunistic TLS connections, deprecate FFDHE entirely or require anything that is necessary to make it safe. That would include group structure. For opportunistic TLS connections, either either you can do whatever you want, or you can fall back to FFDHE without any requirements. I think that was the gist of it. Ecker, would you like to speak?
How about Kyle?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Kyle Nypertz. I'm a little worried if we start to have this carve out for opportunistic clients here. Where is this going to end? I mean, you could say this for pretty much every single issue. what about any kind of certificate validation, any kind of guidance we'd ever, any protocol versions, ciphers, and I'm not sure why this specific issue is somewhere where we should make a specific carve out, as opposed to recognizing that this is probably an issue that the opportunistic clients are going to decide not to follow a recommendation anyway.
Yeah, I agree with Kyle. Also, there's this would beg the question of what counts as opportunistic. So if there's like a credit card processing or anything like that, does that count as opportunistic? So I think we're opening up Pandora's box, to be honest. But yeah, David, please go ahead.
David Skenazy, consensus enthusiast. So just for future reference, I highly urge you to never, put no consensus on your slides, because you're just like kind of painting yourself in a corner. And either way, it's the chair's job to declare if there is consensus or not. So I'm going to do something that's both going to help and be a pain in the ass. You're welcome. I'm going to say that this opportunistic thing, I don't like it, and I'm strongly opposed to it. There. So now number 2 is also no consensus. So we can go back to looking at option 1, which might become a rough consensus if there are only a small number of people who don't like it. So I'm just trying to help.
Fair enough. So, I mean, I think the point here is that we haven't actually done a formal consensus call. It's just been kind of the authors kind of reading the tea leaves for all the mail list. If we're stuck on this point and in a deadlock and we have to pull out the heavyweight consensus email, do all that stuff, we can do that. I just need the words that I'm going to put in the consensus call. And so we can work to try to get those and actually get that going.
So what I would personally propose, and of course it is the chair's purview to decide, is to say option 1, like, do we have consensus on deprecating entirely? And I would encourage anyone in the room who disagrees with deprecating entirely to please come and state why.
So we can actually do that via there's 2 reasons I want to get you to log into the tool, because 1, it determines room size. So next time we're not in some tiny room sweating our faces off. So we could actually do that and do a general poll for if there's any get a sense of the room of whether or not there's any objections to deprecating FFDHE.
So, Tom Thompson, I think that the arguments I've heard since I last stood up here push me towards option 1, deprecate FFDHE entirely. Option 2, deprecate FFE without the good groups, which is a weak second because it requires a lot more text and is a little bit more vague. I don't think we need to do anything for opportunistic clients. David Benjamin found a quote from RFC 7435, which is the opportunistic security RFC that sort of talks about it. And that basically says that if you, an opportunistic protocol may employ more liberal settings than would be best practice when security is mandated by policy. So basically, they're already in this sort of carve out, and someone who wants to do this can ignore this RFC that we publish now and follow the other one, and everything's fine because they're doing opportunistic, and that's totally cool.
So option 1 is deprecate. What did you say option 2 again was?
Just deprecate the groups that are not known as good, which is not great. But I would certainly be in the option 1 camp here.
So, and there was no third option, so it would be a poll.
And there is no third option as far as I'm concerned. I don't think we need to take the suggestion here that was floated originally. I don't think there's any good outcome from that.
So I think there are at least 3 options, but so we can deprecate FFDHE entirely. We can allow FFDHE only with standardized groups, and we can allow FFDHE with any safe group, or we can allow FFDHE with any group large enough without requiring anything about group structure. So that's actually, at least for options that I'm aware of. But I think we're going towards deprecating FFDH entirely. To be honest, I wasn't aware of the RFC you quoted, Martin, where opportunistic settings may employ more liberal policies. That sounds like a good way forward to me. But yeah, Stephen, please go ahead.
All right, Stephen Farrell. So I don't actually disagree with David on this really, but I know that people do, including Victor, and he usually has some good arguments. So I don't think it would be really correct to say we don't have anybody in the room today who disagrees and conclude. I'm not saying you said that. I'm just saying we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is we're going to do a poll since the room, and we'll have to take it to the mailing list. Again, it's not because we know Victor's not here, and I know he's going to have strenuous objections. So
yeah, and reasoned ones. So and then the only other thing I wanted to say was I don't think option 2 is I don't think there's any point in option 2 because as far as I know, it's only Victor and that kind of set of deployments he's discussing that have an issue, and they generally use custom groups. So I don't think option 2 gets us anywhere. So option 2 being just have a safe list of groups.
That's not option 2 in the slide, right? But okay.
No, option 2 as in Martin's option 2.
All right. All right.
I don't think there's any point in sort of saying, it's yeah. So I think throw that one away and don't ask a poll about that. I would suggest.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else wants to speak? Echo?
Yeah. So I'm also concerned at the viability of option 2 for the reason Stephen is, which I suspect it will actually not work. If someone showed me a measurement that showed it would work, I might feel differently. So if someone wants to take a measurement and be like, no, actually all these guys use one of the defined groups, then maybe that feels differently. But I suspect that is not that to be false. I guess I think there seems to be some question. There's some discussion on chat about whether there already is enough of a carve out in the opportunistic descriptions to simply allow us to be a must. I guess we can take this to the list, but I would strongly prefer not to have some weird explicit opt out here. Again, the instructions, we have, how long did it take between when we said banned RC4 and we actually turned off RC4? I mean, basically
we decade.
Yeah, we routinely pass these deprecations and then actually take quite a while to execute them. And the purpose of the deprecation is to signal to people the way they should behave, and that we're trying. And I think it ought to be the position of this group that even opportunistic people should use good ciphers, and that may not currently be practical, but that's what they should do, and we wish they would. And so, the carve out for them is A, the text in the previous document, and B, they can ignore us.
And to quickly add to what Ecker said, just going to tell a quick story that is mainly Chris Wood's story, but he's enjoying his vacation. Go him. I used to work at Apple with him at the time when the working group deprecated TLS-10 and TLS-11. And he actually did all the work to disable it from our general boring SSL code at the time. And it blew up. I forget if it was a mail thing or an EPTLS thing or one of those things that there's a box somewhere that hasn't been updated since I was born kind of thing. And that didn't mean we opposed publishing the RFC. It just means that that we had a thing there, but we didn't have any text about that silly box. That code ignored the recommendation. Everything was fine. So deprecating, even if there are people that can't today, is fine. I'm just very strongly agreeing with Ecker.
I forgot the one more thing I wanted to say, but which I agree with what you just said, which is that the purpose of this document, of this requirement in the context of opportunistic, is to tell people in that ecosystem that they ought to be changing so that in a year they can turn it off. And if we have an explicit carve out for opportunistic, the consequence of that is that they hear we don't have to change. And so 5 years from now, the ecosystem is unchanged and they still can't turn it off. So that's the reason not to have a carve out.
I mean, that was part of why we did RC4, right? We did the RC4 draft because people were like, please, if you write something, I can then go whack people over the head and get it changed. So, all right. So I think what we've come down to, we've had lots of suggestions for various polls. We're going to do a simple one, which is, do you support deprecating FFDHE? So please get to the Meet Echo tool. You will raise your hands if you support, and you will not if you don't. Started. Oh, you're seeing the rocketing live things. And again, we're taking this back to the list. So there's 93 people in the room, as you might be able to see. And we've got about 35-ish people. Give it another minute.
All right. Richard, would you like to speak? Richard?
Yeah, go ahead if you've, Richard. Are you remote? I think you might have to come off. All right, so I think we got enough here. So for the minutes, it was 39 participants, 34 raised hands, and 5 do not raise hands.
All right, so it sounds like we're moving towards deprecating it entirely. And I guess we take it to the list to get a better feel.
So I think that the action item is actually going to be on the chairs, not on you. So we will figure out the right phraseology to get this conversation going. And I look forward to a polite yet lively conversation on the mailing list.
All right, I will be available if you'd like to consult me on the phraseology. Also, Daniel, would you like to speak again?
Yeah, sorry. I don't think that this poll was sufficient to say the move is towards deprecating it entirely. Like, I raised my hand to say I'm fine with deprecating entirely, and I'm also fine with saying deprecate everything but a small list of known groups, right? I mean,
yeah, fair enough, DKG. I think the point is we want to at least have some place to start.
But we want a strong deprecation statement of some sort. Yeah.
Yes, that's really what that was.
All
Okay,
right.
Thank you, Nimrod. We'll go
Thank
to
you.
our next present. All right, so I think we're on to our next presentation, which I believe is, I've forgotten now. I think it's Martin, but I'm not sure. Sorry, let me look at the actual agenda.
I think it is Martin.
I think it's Martin. Come on, Scruffy. Nope, it's Steven.
Oh, Steven.
Steven, the ECH config list. And this draft is significantly changed. This is how you can adopt a working group draft without getting it done before you adopt it.
So I'm hoping that Ben joins and sends audio and video, because this is kind of the Ben version of the draft. There he is. Great.
There he is. Great.
So I'm only Ben would present this if he was here, but and do jump in, Ben, if you want to correct me. So what we did was we had some discussion, and Ben and Rich agreed to help co-author. So what we did in this version is essentially try out to see if some of the ideas that Ben and Rich had, mostly Ben, I think, are something that the working group find better. And so this is a suggestion. We're willing to roll it back if people prefer the 0.0 version. So 0.0 basically describes something I did, and in a very small kind of test deployment, whereas Ben and Rich are familiar with real deployments, which is kind of useful. So draft 1, I think, has been extended to try and cater for a broader range of deployments. In particular, I guess the ones Ben is thinking about. It's not implemented, and if people tell us this just is totally smelly, then we'll happily roll it back. Next slide. So the background is same as last time. You know, ECH requires you to publish a key in a config list in the DNS. And I think one of Ben's goals is to try and do more in this version to avoid anybody cutting and pasting those values. So But yet people will rotate keys, so we need some way to handle it and dynamically generate zones. And yeah, so yeah, again, another thing Ben wanted, he wanted to make it easier to do it a good way than the wrong way. So next slide. So what's different in this one is in 0.0, you were talking to the ECH front end essentially to get the ECH config, the zone, the authoritative for the origin was talking to the ECH front end to get the ECH key and then to put it into the origin's zone. In this one, it's talking to the origin itself because that allows covering kind of more deployment cases that Ben thinks are interesting, which is, I think, true. And otherwise, it's kind of similar that you're publishing a blob of JSON at a .well-known, which allows the zone factory to construct the relevant resource records. Next slide. So Ben, do jump in and correct me if I say something wrong here. So this is the picture for this one, where we have the zone factory, which creates the resource records and writes them to DNS. It has to occasionally fetch values because keys are being rotated. And the origin in this case might have to talk to the ECH front end because that's where the ECH keys are actually being generated. And so what you could think of is that the bottom part there in lighter blue is draft 0, sort of. Whereas, and then in this draft, because you're going to the origin, you can do a bit more. So next slide. And then there's a comparison between, JSON blobs. And again, I think we have no problem changing these in any particular way because they're pretty sketchy at the minute. But basically, it allows you to have the same kind of information. Next slide. JSON's not that interesting. And then these are the kind of HTTPS RRs that you might end up with. I'm not entirely sure I even know what a template RR is, but I can kind of guess, but I'm not sure how accurate that guess would be. But in any case, the zone factory can use the JSON to make resource records. Next slide. This is the thing that's kind of new, is that Ben, I think, rightly points out that the draft 0 kind of handles the kind of weird case that I was interested in for my test sites. Probably many more people will just use a CNAME or something. And he wanted to provide a way to make that a bit easier and a bit less error prone. And so that's kind of the main reason why you want to talk to the origin, I guess. So that's kind of a nice thing about it, is that you can just create a JSON blob that then eventually turns into a CNAME, or one of the other ways of aliasing, which I think is nice. On the other hand, it also kind of feels a bit dangerous, but I'm not quite sure why. But nonetheless, this version of the draft envisages supporting that kind of use case, which I guess would be by far the most common way of doing this, but I don't know for sure. I'm just pausing there in case Ben wants to add something or somebody wants to scream that this is mad for some reason. Nobody screaming. Okay, next slide. This still has the kind of support for the multi-CDN. I wouldn't say we put a huge amount of work into this. It probably needs a bit more thought, a bit more working out and playing around to try and make it work. But it should work, I think. Basically, where you can pick up the ECH keys from the CGN and then put them on the origin. It's essentially, this is like saying that, do the draft 0 thing between the origin and the CDN, and then you'd use this to get the resource records created. So it's a little bit of a two-step thing, but should work. Next slide. Ben prefers, in version 0, we had TTLs in the JSON. Ben prefers to use HTTP freshness. I don't know if that makes sense. If I have a very simple kind of script that just uses curl or something to pull these things, I'm not sure how easy it is to get that, but I haven't looked, so maybe you can. And again, I think as before, it was pretty clear that people didn't want ordinary kind of clients for ECH using these URLs, so we should discourage that. Next slide. Yeah, this template stuff would need to be figured out. There's probably, with this version, there's probably some things about IP addresses and so on that might get tricky. I don't know what support for non-HTTPS protocols means here, but I don't know what Ben had in mind when he put that bullet in. And I guess some other HTTP things might have to be thought about.
Hi.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay. Yeah. I mean uses of ECH and TLS for things other than HTTP.
Okay. But what did you have like Quick or something in mind, or what? Some example, or? So,
we lost you.
even though I'm doing very badly presenting Ben's ideas, it's a good job I'm here. So there you go. Anyway, yeah, there's a bunch of things to be figured out. So next slide, I think, is the last one, is it? Okay, that's the question. It's well, okay. What do you think? I mean, do people have opinions? It might be a little bit.
Can we ask how many people actually read this version of the draft?
Yeah. Okay.
There's a couple. I see a couple of hands up there. Good. And then, well, I'll be honest. One of the reasons why I was concerned about this draft being in this working group is there weren't a lot of DNS people, but at least there's a couple of people around here I know that are really smart about this stuff. So don't be bashful. Now's your chance to learn.
So if people have any immediate reactions, that would be useful, because we're not. It's not that this is something we're terribly invested in. We're looking for, is this a better direction than what was in draft 0? Do you don't care?
So from a personal perspective, I think it's better if we have wider deployments in mind. Right?
So
better. It's better if we have wider deployments in mind.
Okay. Any other feedback? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's personally, we kind of did this in the last few weeks, so we need to do more work on it really as well. Ben, did you?
Yeah. So, okay. Sorry. Yeah, my Meet Echo has not been stable for me this week. The template thing is an attempt to balance these competing desires. On the one hand, we're trying to stick to only talking about ECH and information you need to know to make use of an ECH config. And on the other hand, ultimately your HTTP, your zone factory is going to produce DNS records that have a bunch of other stuff in them that are telling you things like, does this support HTTP3? Is this actually something about oblivious DO? Like all this different metadata about the origin. And so we said, let's focus on ECH here and leave that to the DNS side. So that means the zone factory has to know all this other stuff in advance. All we're doing is moving the ECH keys across. But then you need a matching algorithm. You need some way to say, well, okay, I've got several endpoints with different ECH keys. Which one goes into which of those records? And so that's sort of the templating idea here.
David.
Hi, David Skenazy, DNS enthusiast. First, I think the more generic approach, I like it. Just conceptually, having a way to do this sounds good. So first, a clarifying question. How is your intent here that browsers always query this well-known on all websites? So then
the intention. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
The intention is that browsers do not know about this at all. The client here is a zone factory, which is a term that Stephen sort of appropriated for a component of an authoritative DNS server that is populating the zone.
Oh, I get it. All right, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so the feedback I'm getting is not crazy, worth fleshing out a bit more, and we'll do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ben.
Martin, you're up next for our final presentation. Always great slides.
I was looking for more birthday party things. This should be short. I hope everyone knows what this is. I'm not going to really explain it very much because the next slide. has basically all that's really necessary on this point. I know that a lot of people use an environment variable of this name to do debugging of their TLS stacks. I think it's pretty widely implemented, not particularly widely deployed, which is a good thing. And tools like Wireshark and whatnot use this natively. We also have a draft in some ops area working group that I think it's the ops area working group that they're trying to define the PCAP format in RFC form that's going to rely on this. Next, please. Okay, why? So currently the authoritative documentation for this file format is sitting in the NSS source tree. That's not great. It gets published on a web page. It used to be published on MDN, and then they decided they didn't want all of this documentation, and so it's now in the Firefox source docs thing that's pretty hard to find, and I think it's probably more appropriate that it has a stable home. And the next slide. So we take that documentation and we put it in an RFC. That's it. And the idea is to give change control to the IETF. Next. Done. See, look at that. Very easy. I guess the question is this work that this working group wants to take on? Should I ask an operations area working group instead? I'd rather not.
So I can take a poll if there's support for adopting this, and then we can take it to the mailing list. My, excuse me, my understanding is that this would be informational, not necessarily standards track, because it's not interoperability formats, so to speak. Or are we in the minutia?
It is an interoperability thing. I mean, one stack produces something and some other tool consumes it. There's an argument to be had here for making it standards track.
All right, I'm not falling on this sword for sure. So let's just take a general poll to see if there's interest, and I will write that up now.
David Skenazy, yes.
Nalini?
Yeah, sorry, I can't get my meet echo to work, so I couldn't get in the queues. But yeah, no, I think I support this work a great deal. I think it's very, very useful. Just out of curiosity, is there any, I don't know if it's in scope or out of scope, but is there any thought of saying like that browsers or other things should implement something like this? Just a question.
No, there's a great deal of debate about this. Even within my own project, there are people who would rather this not be enabled in release builds and things like that. It carries significant risks to both security and privacy to enable this thing. And so rightfully, people are concerned about implementing this. This is not uniformly implemented, as I understand. There are a number of stacks that simply don't do this, and that's okay. Some people don't need it.
Stephen, question and a possible comment, well, an inevitable comment. But the question is, to what extent does the current documentation contain warnings and guardrails? It just tells you how to do it, right?
So the current documentation is, here's the format, that's it.
Right. So
the RFC has a large section on the privacy and security implications of recording one of these things and the information that's in there. That's one of the changes that I've made.
Okay, sorry, is there a draft published or?
There's a draft published.
Oh, sorry, I missed that slide, I guess. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I would actually strangely be supportive of documenting how to do it if we put enough text saying when not to do it in there. And that might take quite a bit of wrangling, I suppose.
Take a look at what I put in there. I spent maybe an entire hour on this document, so it's probably not complete. But there is a fairly substantial section on, what do you do when you got one of these things? What are the risks to the active connections and the connections that happened in the past that might be logged in this way, and various other things.
Right, and I would tend to think this might be better as informational, because I think that might make the bun fight a bit more tractable. But
It's not a stupid question. How's this different from PKCS8?
Sorry, the audio here is just horrific. I can't.
PKCS8?
That
You said? Yeah. How's it
shrouded
different?
key bags.
How is it different than PKCS number 8?
8.
Oh, 8.
The storage one, you know? That's the
we
storage one.
Yeah, we don't do anything fancy in terms of protecting the secrets here. It's just hex.
Just plain text key hanging out.
Here's some hex just in the thing. So if you're operating in FIPS mode in a lot of things, you just can't do this, for instance.
So then I don't care, right?
Right, you probably don't care. You're one of those people who probably like, I can't do this, then I can't do this. That's fine.
My badge, sorry. Yeah, so I don't care, right? Because I'm going to make you do FIPS, damn it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So NSX
This is also
yeah.
This is also more of like a stream of keys sort of format, in the sense you can like pipe this out of a stack into a Wireshark or whatever. So it's pretty different from the container format.
All right, so I have a poll ready to go, which is to get a sense of the room. Is there interest in working on draft Thompson-TLS-keylog file ID in the TLS working group? I will start that session now and give people some time to raise. Means yes, you would like it to. No means no.
Do not raise is not the absence of an answer. It is the opposition.
Yes.
To this stupid tool.
All right, we'll give it about another 30 seconds.
So I'd be curious to hear why we would concretely not do this.
All right, so it seems like we're stabling out at somewhere in the 30s. Ending it. All right, so 33 participants, 28 raised hands, and 5 do not raise hands. I'll end the session now. And is there anybody who said, who kind of doesn't want to do this? They're willing to get to the microphone to say why. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So I guess the only thing, since we're actually done early for like once in like the last 10 years, in the last, in the last, and so there's definitely some chatter in the room about just close the session, but we have a few drafts that have been out that were adopted and then expired. So I guess the question is, what should we do with those? The two that come to mind specifically are the batch signatures, and the other one is the semi-static draft. So I'm curious if David Benjamin wants to get to the microphone and say anything about batch signing, or if he'd like it to quietly go away. And not getting the microphone is a perfectly fine answer, so that we know not to keep harping on this and we can just kind of let it quietly just drift off into space.
David Benjamin. At one point, batch signing enthusiast, but at this point, I like the thing that I was interested in it for no longer happened. It seems no one has picked it up. Like, I think if someone wants it, it's a cool mechanism, but I don't have time to drive it.
Fair enough.
No one else does either.
So what we'll do is it's expired. We will let the process do its thing, and it's expired. And if anybody else wants to take it over and run with it, we will. They can contact us, and we will see how we can go from there. On the semi-static, Ecker?
Orange is ahead of me in the queue.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. So yes, I still do care about semi-static. I think others do too. It just, I can only do about one thing at once right now. So, ask me again when 8446 business is done.
Okay, great. Thanks. Martin?
So I understand that there's some way for chairs to sort of mark a document as like abandoned or something like that.
Right.
I suggest we do that. Drafts can be unabandoned at any time. So for the batch signing thing, just say, look, we're not working on this right now.
Well, I mean, it's technically, I believe it's actually expired, and so it's actually fallen out of the working group. Let me double.
Does that work? Does that happen for expired drafts? I think expired drafts sort of have this still have this sort of residual state thing that's in there. Yeah, and they show up in the tracker and whatnot. But if you mark them as abandoned, they sort of.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Off into the
I'll figure
wilderness.
out how to press the buttons. And
Yeah.
we'll,
And we might not do that for the semi-static one.
yeah. I mean, yeah. So
Whatever.
okay. All right. Great. And that brings us to a close. 35 minutes, 36 minutes early. That is fantastic. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. And if you're staying for the rest of the week, the rest of the week. Ciao. Thank you to our note takers, Florence and Mike, if you helped. That's great. Appreciate it.
All right.
A wildly successful meeting. All right, Paul, what's your